Alright, nerds, we're doing Twilight again today. And for some reason, I have subjected myself to reading The Short Second Life of Bree Tanner, which is probably just one of the most fruitless endeavors that the human soul can embark upon, alright? The human mind, okay? I had to look up a synopsis of this book before I did this video twice because it's just so pointless. I did the House of Night series, and that had a load of novellas in it that also just added nothing to the plot. And now I'm kind of realizing that maybe they were inspired by this book because this is just one of the worst parts of the entire Twilight series, and that is saying something. Because if you have seen any of my previous videos about Twilight, then you know that I do not enjoy them very much. But this book is a standout because I find that I enjoy reading the Twilight books. Ironically, almost like to make fun of them. There are things that are silly about them that are fun to enjoy, and there are discussions to be had about them, I feel, that are of merit. This book adds nothing to those discussions. And I'm going to talk to you about why, but first, I'm going to give you a plot synopsis before I forget what this book is about again. The main characters in this book are obviously Bree Tanner, and her love interest is Diego. They've both kind of recently been turned into vampires to be part of the vampire army that come and attack the Cullens in Eclipse. They have been told by their leader, Riley, that if they go outside in the sun, they will burn up like traditional vampires. And so when they get trapped outside one day as the sun's about to rise, they go to hide in some underwater cavern cave thing. I don't know. They spend the night talking stuff out and they realize that a lot of the things Riley has told them doesn't add up. And Diego reveals that he knows that they don't actually burn up in the sun, they just sparkle. Obviously, they're very suspicious of their leaders. They know that perhaps they are being lied to. But Diego still kind of trusts Riley and thinks that he might be being lied to also by the big leader, who we know is Victoria, but these guys don't have a fucking clue who she is. So the two of them go to spy on Riley and Victoria and witness a meeting between them and the Volturi. And the Volturi basically say that if they don't go and confront the Cullens soon, then the Volturi are going to have to come and kill all of the newborn vampires and also them. So putting a lot of pressure on here. When they get back to the little hideout where the vampire army is, Diego decides to go and talk to Riley and admit what they have found out. And then he says he's going to come back to Bree and they're going to run away together. Diego never comes back. It's very obvious to me as a reader, I don't know if it's obvious to you, that he has been killed. Bree does not cotton on to this. Bree is like a 15, 16-year-old girl, so it's kind of acceptable, I guess. She goes along with the vampire army, and obviously we know, as per the end of Eclipse, the book, she is captured and eventually killed by the Volturi. I kind of wanted to explore for what reason Stephanie Meyer felt like she had to write this book. Like, what about Bree as a character really inspired her to go that extra mile for her and not for other characters that have appeared in the series and that we as readers might be a lot more attached to, like Bella's friends at school and stuff like that. Obviously, there's the mystery of knowing what was happening and how they were training up the newborn vampires and stuff. Like, that could be quite interesting. But I'm going to spoil it for you right now. There's not a lot of detail about that. And I don't think anybody who's seen any of the rest of my reviews was expecting any detail about anything that could even remotely be considered interesting. In fact, this is essentially, it's not even the love story between Bree and Diego because they're not even together for the majority of the story. I think it's meant to be a tragedy. Well, I don't know. Well, should we get into the notes? Let's get into the notes. We'll come to our conclusions at the end. So there's a little introduction by Stephanie Meyer at the beginning of this. Stephanie says, personally, I've never figured out why some of my characters take on strong lives as their own. I feel like Stephanie Meyer has talked a lot about her writing process in interviews and stuff. And the impression that I get is that she just kind of writes whatever comes to her in the moment. And that's kind of what she means by characters taking on a life of their own. I understand to a certain extent when you are writing that sometimes you may want the plot to go in a certain direction, but the way that you have developed your characters and the way that the story has actually come to fruition in the book, that plot point or the place you wanted to get to is no longer relevant, right? It's like the FNAF 4 box, okay? Because Scott Cawthon had an idea of what was going to be in the FNAF 4 box, right? Which was this big mystery at the time of the game came out. People are still talking about it now, 10 years later. And he recently revealed in an interview that yes, although originally there was something in the box, now that the story has come so far and there's been so many games since then, the thing that was originally in the box does not make sense. And he maybe already has another idea for what's going to be in the box, or maybe the box just isn't relevant anymore. It's a mystery that's never going to be solved. It's just something that became unnecessary as the story went on. And so I understand that there is this creative process and that sometimes the characters may lead you to places in the book that you, even as the author, were not expecting to go. Okay, but I feel like Stephanie Meyer is just totally at the mercy of her characters, and I feel like she really just needs a bit more discipline. Okay, especially because she also says about writing Bree specifically and knowing that she's going to meet her death at the end of the book. The closer I got to the inevitable end, the more I wished I concluded Eclipse just slightly differently. And it's like, this is where you need to have more discipline as a writer, because if you care too much about your characters to have them go through difficulties or to even kill them off, then you're not going to write books that have impact on the reader. Okay, sometimes you gotta spill a little blood as an author to make us give a shit about the book. I wrote in my notes that obviously her saying this about writing Bree Tanner does not bode well for the last book, because I really feel like in order for the last book, Breaking Dawn in the Twilight series, to have any impact, it's Stephanie Meyer is really gonna have to like ramp up the tension and the danger. Okay, somebody needs to die. And we all know obviously that that's not going to happen. This is me being a little bit ironic right now, but it's true. It was true at the time, it's true now. So let's get into the plot. Obviously the novella very short, okay, by nature, so there's not a lot of time for us to get into Bree and Diego as characters before we get into what I would consider, I guess, the action of the book. The basics are that Bree likes books and Diego likes music. So basically it's just Edward and Bella again, sorry. We're just reskinning them a little bit. We're making them a little bit edgier, which is why I've got the tank top on today, and also it's 30 degrees outside. I'm gonna jump immediately into a heavy topic here and just say that Bree gets introduced. Diego, I'm pretty sure, is 18, and she says she's 16, but becoming a vampire obviously makes your human memories hazy, and so Stephanie Meyer specifically feels the need to mention that Bree doesn't remember her 16th birthday, so actually she might be 15. So, and it's like, why did you have to even make that a plot point? Like, why is it so important to you that this relationship have that little, like, that age gap thing? Like, Stephanie Meyer just seems to weirdly be obsessed with age gap relationships in this series, and it's really just starting to freak me out. I don't necessarily, there's even, well, I do a little bit. I think that there's a discussion to be had about a 15, nearly 16-year-old and an 18-year-old being together, but it's just weird that we're even having to have that discussion in the first place when she could have just made her definitively 16, and it would have been, at the very least, legal, I guess. So like I say, they get trapped outside of the vampire hideaway, Bree and Diego, and they spend the night putting some shit together and deciding that they're suspicious of their leaders. They put all of this stuff together in one day, in one like overnight session for them, I guess. Stephanie Meyer lampshades the fact that they haven't put all this together sooner by saying that their insatiable thirst for blood has kind of distracted them from doing any critical thinking, which is fine if she hadn't already said earlier that the two of them can go months/days without blood, respectively. Diego, being a vampire for longer, has a little bit more control over his bloodlust. And so it's like, what the fuck are they thinking about for the rest of the time, if that's true? That they haven't had a little bit of a light bulb moment considering their circumstances. Diego tells Bree that he found out that you don't burn in sunlight, and he decides to prove it to her, and he puts his arm out into the sun. Bree's expecting him to burn up, and he doesn't, and she says, so maybe his story about shade trees was true. And I really can't tell if this was intentional or if this is like a typo, but either way, it's a really weird thing to read, and it really took me out of the reading experience. I really think that if this was a typo, that's pretty egregious, because this book is so fucking short, man. It wouldn't have taken a lot of time to go over it. So I know that Steph has always said that the vampires are hard like rock and they're like marble, but I don't know, when I was younger, I always took it as more of a metaphor for how like still and otherworldly they are, and I never really took it too literally. In this book, Bree and Diego decide to kiss, and it says, kissing didn't sound the same with vampires as it did with humans. No soft, fleshy, liquid-filled cells to swish against each other. Just stone lips. No give. I don't know, it just sounds really unfortunate, doesn't it? I guess for the vampires it feels good, but it sounds really not nice to me. And that just got me thinking about other stuff that's admittedly kind of gross, like, if all of them are rock solid all the time, then does that mean that the men are always hard? Do the vampire women have jiggle physics, or do their tits just stay completely still when they walk? How has nobody realised that these people are not human yet? Also, I just want to say that sex with Edward must fucking rag as a human for Bella. So you're pouring out for my girl. Girls, I had a theory in Eclipse that Stephanie Meyer does not understand clauses. Can I show you something? Look at this. Right, look at this sentence right there. Does that look right to you? Does that look right? She says, terror and disbelief as he leapt the 10 yards to the door. Terror and then pain, leaving no room for disbelief as he broke my arm, dragging me through the door into the back house. Maybe she's doing it for a sense of tension and a sense of immediacy for us to be in the action scene, which is something that I've ragged on her about before, that she doesn't do that. So I appreciate it if that is what she's trying. But you can't just ignore punctuation in a part of your book to add tension, really, especially when the rest of your prose has just not adhered to that in the slightest. And I really feel like it doesn't happen at any other part in the book. So I just feel like Stephanie Meyer didn't know that there was meant to be a couple of commas in that sentence. So we do find out that the Volturi and Victoria spoke directly through this novella, but I really don't feel like it adds that much to the conversation. We already knew that the Volturi were malicious and that they were holding back from acting about the army because they were seeing what would happen and whether the Cullens would be eradicated. So I don't really think it makes any difference that they went and had a conversation with Victoria about it. I don't think it changes our perspective on them any. We already knew that the guys were corrupt. When Bree gets back to the vampire hideout and Diego goes to find Riley and tell them what they've discovered, we are treated to 9 pages of Bree sitting and thinking, which is great. I think that if Bree was thinking about stuff that was interesting to us and that we didn't already know as readers, this would be a completely different experience, because obviously part of reading a first-person book like this is being inside the character's head and figuring things out along with them. But Bree's just putting together the plot of Twilight for us, okay? We already know all the information, and so it feels like we could just skim these pages and nothing would be gained. And that is true. I feel like as well, it doesn't really matter what Riley told the young vampires to get them to fight. The fact that they turn up and fight is good enough, and it doesn't require a whole book for us to know that information. I feel like we could have just been left to wonder about that and make up our own theories. The conversation he has telling them about the Cullens' special abilities is completely wasted because we already knew about that. We don't have to hear about all of this. This is not new information to us. There's this one vampire called Fred who Bree has this kind of friendship with. He has this repelling power that makes people not want to be near him. I think it makes you feel nauseous inside your brain when you come near him. Bree kind of withstands it a little bit because she knows that being near him also gives her this protection, and as a result, they kind of kindle this friendship. Fred kind of gets sus of the leaders as well and decides to run away before they all go to fight the Cullens, and he asks Bree to come with him. And I would have really, really liked a relationship to have developed between Bree and Fred. It would have been really cool if Diego wasn't dead and he betrayed her in the end somehow, and Bree got away and went to run away with Fred, or Fred came back to try and rescue her and she still tragically died. Just something a little bit more interesting than what we got here, but I understand at this point I'm writing fan fiction. But I did just want to mention Fred because I do think that he is an interesting character and I feel like more could have been done with him. Bree describes Bella as having the best smelling blood she's ever smelt in her entire life, and I understand that this is the way that Edward feels about her, but why the fuck does every other vampire feel this way about her? Like, are we ever given an explanation of why Bella smells so fucking good to all of these guys? Has she got oregano in her blood? After all of this build-up, I think the thing that anybody who read Eclipse would want to see the most is the fight that Bella missed out on while she was having a 3-way cuddle with Edward and Jacob in the woods, right? We are treated to exactly 1 page of this fight, and it's Emmett punching a couple of guys, and then Bree runs away. And then obviously after all this, Bree ends up murdered anyway. So I ask you again, what was the point of all of this? The romance was pointless. It lasted 2 minutes and then Diego dies and Bree is too stupid to figure it out, which I feel like 99% of the audience probably would have. It's really hard, I think, to root for a character who you know is going to die, and Stephanie Meyer does nothing to improve that experience for me. Also, why is it in past tense if she dies at the end? I think that for me, this book just doesn't up the stakes in any way. It doesn't reveal any new information to us. It would have been really effective if we had seen the Volturi as a kind of overall good force in the vampire world and people who keep order and try to keep humans safe, but that's not where Stephanie decided to go in the Twilight series at all. We knew from the beginning that they were bringing groups of humans in and feeding on them, and the only thing they want to do is keep their power in the vampire world, and they lord it over everybody else. So the reveal that they are plotting against the Cullens has no effect on us because we already knew that they were an opposing force. Anyway, in conclusion, I can't believe I made myself read this again, and I will never make that mistake again in my life. This I promise anybody who's watching this video, and also myself, and also the Lord. So yeah, that's it.